Okay, Nick, this is the final part here. You've plowed through these. Bookies don't lay bets. Wants to know, do you miss working at Coral?
No, is the answer. I don't miss it at all. I miss a few people, and 5, 6, 7 people that I used to. There aren't many left. To be honest, there aren't that many left there that were close friends anyway. But I mentioned I made reference to the racing guys before. I've got full respect for that racing team, and I think people on the outside, especially if you can't get on with them anymore, there's a temptation in betting to say, if a firm restricts you, they must all be useless, and that's just not the case. There's still some really good traders left in all firms, and that racing desk at Ladbrokes Coral, as it is now, I absolutely believe is still the best around. They all stayed intact after the merger because they were all that good, the Coral guys. I miss seeing those guys and having a drink with them after work sometimes. But do I miss the politics involved and the people outside trading, chirping up with views on stuff that I don't miss it at all. No.
Just a question for me with that. Do you think that a lot of the guys at these places are frustrated that they're not allowed to show their skills and it's just a blunt weapon that everybody gets restricted? That taking away
so,
that.
I think there'll be a small element of that, but mostly I think that they've just resigned to the fact that that's a battle that they can't win anymore, and that trading rooms aren't the most powerful places in betting companies as they were when I joined. Now, but that is something that I do think will come back a little bit, and I do think the stuff we talked about with minimum bet limits and a change in mentality that I do think will come to some extent, will bring back the importance of savvy, good trading. So I do think that the trading rooms at the moment have the least power that they've ever had in betting, but I think that will change a little bit.
Okay, now Brothers would like to know, which non-UK regulated operator is the most reliable payer, and what is the easiest route to transacting with them when assuming UK bank accounts are not accepted?
I mean, this is tricky. I don't advocate any sort of illegal betting, so I don't really know that much about those operators, but there are firms that you can use to bet into the Asian market that are legal, and there are ways out there. And if he wants to contact me, I'm more than happy to sort of introduce to people who can get Asian bets on for you without there being any legal issues.
Okay, now we've mentioned the minimum bet laws or limits. So the Racing Trends would like to know, do you see it as an inevitability over in the UK?
Yeah, so we touched on this earlier, and I do think that if the industry wants to keep its fingers in its ears and do what it did with responsible gambling, these measures that are coming now from this Gambling Act review are a result of the industry not wanting to face up to its issues 7, 8, 10 years ago. And the irony is that in the last 3 or 4 years, they really have. They've bucked up their ideas. Maybe some new people have come into senior positions. They've seen that this was inevitable, and they've done more than ever to help on the responsible gambling front. But all the mistakes they made 10 years ago in not seeing what was coming is exactly what they're doing now. And they still are in denial that they might have a minimum bet rule imposed upon them, which won't be for the good. It won't be for the good of anyone. That's the problem. Because I think that if it's forced on them, the way they'll react will be unfortunate. And that might mean removing a load of things that are good for normal punters. Best odds guarantee, extra places, those kind of things. They might sort of almost feel like they've got to retaliate to what imposed upon them by removing those things. And for 90-95% of punters, that'll be bad. So the people that I think we have to say that the people that are mostly advocates for minimum bet limits are those that are so frustrated with the way bookmakers act now. They just want fairness at all costs without being willing to delve a bit deeper and look at what would work best for everyone. and that's how I'm coming at it, and this mentality change that needs to come from the top, I'm convinced is the way that this could come out best for everyone. But if they don't embrace it in the next year or two, if they don't show any willingness to try to do something, it will be forced upon them, and then they can't argue it's not fair because they had their opportunity.
Okay. Now, Sam Alexander would like to know: do you trade out regularly or let a bet ride?
Now, I almost always let every bet ride, with the exception of cases where it might be a position that I don't get myself into very often. Say I had an anti-post multiple that's going to pay way more than I've ever won before. I might take a small amount of bad value to hedge some of that, willingly take bad value, because people say if you never hedge, it'll all equal itself out in the long run. They're right, other than in cases which you might only get yourself into 5 times in your life, because there's no sample size there for them to equal out over your lifetime. So if I got in a position where I was just standing to win an absolute bundle, and I'm on a multiple at 200 to 1, 3 legs of 1, and the 4th leg goes evens, but I have to take 4 to 5 to get out, I'll do that willingly to close some of that position, because it's all I can't put myself in a position to let that play itself out and shrug my shoulders if it gets beat, because you're only in those positions a few times. But in a general rule, day to day, no hedging of anything. Probably hedge a couple of bets. Again, if I back a snooker player for a tournament at 66 and he gets to the final and he's 6 to 4, and I make him that price, maybe I'll smooth a little bit of it over. But 5-6 times a year, maybe.
Okay, now it's interesting that you mentioned multiples. Now, would you do multiples as a part of your professional armory, or is that something just in case, like a normal punter would do?
If you've got an edge and you know you've got an edge, and you can get multiple, there's several advantages of betting multiples. First of all, the firms are slightly more likely to lay them because they associate multiple betting with recreational punters, so you can slip under the radar to some extent that way. Actually, not all the time. They're onto that, especially as a result of those high-profile racing cases. But you're also creating bigger value for yourself, because you're multiplying. The reason bookmakers make money on multiples is that losing punters multiply bad value by bad value, and that makes extra bad value. So it's the other way around. If you've got 2 things that you know should be even money and you can get 6 to 4 twice, the combined price, when you've had that multiple, is even more value than backing the singles would have been. Now, so for casual punters, you have to stand, you'll win less often having the double, but when you do win, you'll win proportionately more than you would have done by betting the singles. So yeah, if you've got an edge and you can get multiples on, get them.
Okay, I'm sorry, I've missed this one earlier, Nick. Andy Graham, 66. The Pinnacle model has prided itself on the concept that the closing line is closest to the correct price at any time in the life of a market. Football markets now seem full of large amounts of money moving prices in whichever way those with unlimited funds decide to do so. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I did. Most of my answers to this, I think, in an earlier part where we talked about closing prices and why they're not always right. And the Pinnacle model, I've got no issues with the Pinnacle model at all. I think they're extremely smart. I know they're extremely smart, but even they've had to adapt the way they trade and their limits, as I mentioned earlier in the week, because it just wasn't making commercial sense for them to have those limits higher on the early market where they were getting beat. So they've had to adapt to the way they trade. And I don't believe, although the closing price is probably the best way out there still for most people to judge themselves. I think if you're betting only at closing price, you've got to find a different way of judging, ranking your bets, if you like. But for most people, judging themselves against closing price is still the safest way of doing it. But be aware that those prices are not always correct.
Okay, now we've got a collection of questions here about Wolverhampton Wanderers. So I'll lump them all together. You're a
Okay.
football punter, following Wolves around the country. Do you find yourself constantly checking other scores of your bets while you're at a Wolves game, or are you good at switching off? Have you ever been distracted? And then Paul Fetton would like to know, have you ever been distracted by a bet elsewhere, which is a similar sort of thing? And do you watch certain games on the Saturday when Wolves aren't playing that you've had a bet on, or do you just watch the scores coming through? I know it's a lot garbled together, but that's Stuart
No.
Ackerster.
So I've got worse at this actually. I used to be able to go to a game, have all my bets, and just switch off, turn my phone off, watch the game, look at the results at 5 o'clock. When you get involved with groups of other people and you're actually risking other people's money for them as well as yourself, that comes with a responsibility, I think, to trade as careful, to be on top of everything. And so for that reason now I go to fewer matches than I used to. I don't go to Saturday 3 o'clock games as much as I used to. I like to go Sundays, Wednesday nights, Thursday nights, Monday nights, whenever the games are now, whether they're the only game or there's only 1 or 2 games a day. But I actually give my season ticket to a friend for the Saturday 3 o'clock games now, because I would rather be at my desk in that period leading up to 3 o'clock kickoffs and following a range of games rather than the one that I'm at. So that's something that has had to change, and it's reduced my enjoyment of life a little bit, because going to football with my friends is it's been my biggest hobby for 30 years. And I'm not doing it quite as much as I used to.
Okay. Is the Pen Tandoori your favourite Wolverhampton eatery, A. Morris Racing?
It would be up there, but it's not. My favourite place to go would probably be a pub called the Builders Arms, which does a cracking mixed grill. I like the Queen's Cantonese Chinese restaurant in the town centre, and I like an Indian place called the Bilash. That would be, if anyone's ever in Wolverhampton and needs to eat, the Bilash would be my suggestion. It's fantastic Indian food.
Okay, right. This is the final question, Nick, from Jim GB. If you were 20 years younger with a betting edge, would you A, go all out pro punting, B, pursue a job in the industry, C, something else? And would a young person talented enough to have the edge, now, be likely better rewarded long term in another industry entirely?
Wow, that's probably the hardest question last. Would I pursue a job in the industry now if I thought I had a betting edge? The answer's got to be no, because I don't think they value that or want that at the moment. So if I had a big betting edge, my options would only be to go pro punting or to try to use that edge alongside doing something alongside the industry or outside of the industry entirely. What would I recommend to my children to do if they ended up having a betting edge? I wouldn't suggest getting into the industry, and I wouldn't suggest pro punting. So I think it depends what your edge is and how long you think it's going to last. Is it through some sort of modelling thing which may or may not stand the test of time, or it's just beating the market right now but might not in a couple of years? How's the industry going to? We'll all know more once this review's over about the direction of travel of the whole industry and how it's going to be possible for pro punters to carry on and what they're going to need to do. I mean, I'm not concerned from a personal perspective, because, as I said, using Asian handicaps as my main method, that won't change. If I lost shops or completely lost the ability to any UK online accounts, that might take away 20% of my turnover. That's not going to kill me. It would be it's annoying, because that's the biggest market, as we spoke about earlier, that your biggest ROI comes there. So if I lost 20% of my turnover, I might actually lose that might be 33% of my ROI, which would be quite annoying. But we'll all deal with the cards that we're dealt on the back of this review. What's annoying at the moment is we're just sitting around waiting, and we have been for so long. I think most punters, right-minded punters, just want to be told, these are the rules, now crack on. This is what you can do, this is what you can't do. Try and make it pay within those rules. If you can't, you better do something else. But at the moment, we're in limbo, just waiting for someone to decide what those rules are. And the biggest worry is that we have to assume that the people that are going to make those rules don't really understand betting, and that's why we should all be writing to our MPs, doing as much as we can at the moment to continue lobbying on this, for punters.
Okay, I said it was the final question. I've just got one final question. Have you got a plan B?
No. Plan B will be just to do plan A slightly different if you need to change. There's no. If it really did die, then there would need to be some sort of plan B. But no, there isn't. It'll just be it's always going to be to adapt, and that's the attitude and the mentality of all pro punters. You've got to have a can-do. I'll make this work somehow attitude. That's how everyone survived. Every since the beginning of time for pro punter, anyone that's wanted to punt, doors, they try to close doors in your face. You've got to find ways to reopen them. That's always been how it's worked, and always been how it'll have to work.
Brilliant. Well, as a closing note, that's fantastic, Nick. Well, thanks very much for your time, and thanks again, Nick Goff. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers.